those one or hundreds of workplaces. And the workplace standards are guidelines, policy and procedures, codes of conduct in relation to anything that may be workplace health and safety, equity and diversity. Again, these are all things that we need to be able to train and assess against, because they are the benchmarks in which we will be assessing against that complement the units of competency that we're going to look at later. Moving through the system, I'll just remove myself again so that we can see the full. Again, working for an RTO, it's a very important registered training organisation that there is what we call the VET, Vocational Education and Training Quality Framework. And under that, we've got there in the slide, under that umbrella, we have, you need to understand under vocational education and training that there are what we call AQF, the Australian Qualifications Framework. There is the VET Quality Framework and the standards for RTOs in which in which an RTO, who you as a trainer and assessor will work for. And they are the standards that are applied to us individually. And as again for registration of the RTO, as well as and the continual registration for that RTO, registered training organisation, moving forward in the business. And these are the national standards. When we talk about vocational education and training being national, these are the areas that are nationally administered and regulated. And we're going to look at the structure in more detail. And first of all, I'd like to, let's move down to the next slide. And it talks about here the Australian Qualification Framework, which is one of those standards in relation to the VET Quality Framework. And that is about the levels of the qualifications that are within the broader educational and VET training system. And we're going to look at that in more detail in coming slides. And again, the quality standards, which I talked about earlier in relation to the registration and continuing registration for RTOs practicing in the VET system. Very important, yes, they are the standards for RTOs, but we as trainers and assessors work for the registered training organisations in which those standards apply. So it's very important to understand those. Moving on. Again, I will take myself out of the slide so you can see it in more detail. And you'll see here, I talked to you about earlier, the Australian Qualification Framework. And again, it is a broader system. It's the educational system, broader educational system on which our qualifications are made up. And it covers the school sector, it covers the VET sector in which we work, and the higher education sector where we have universities and tertiary education providers fit into the Australian Qualifications Framework. Principally, there are 10 levels in relation to the VET, Australian Qualifications Framework. Within the VET sector, we have, it applies for eight levels, starting at Certificate 1, Certificate 2, Certificate 3, 4, Diploma, Advanced Diploma, Vocational Graduate Certificate, and Vocational Graduate Diploma. As you can see, it ranges from one, and there's level 7 is a bachelor degree issued by universities, and our, in the VET sector, our, if you want to call them postgraduate, is at level 8. And it's very important in relation to working within an RTO that you understand the importance of these levels. We must make sure when we're delivering, when we're designing, delivering and assessing training and assessment to a particular individual in the workplace, that we're pitching the training and assessment at the appropriate level for that person. That is critical to understanding your role as a trainer and assessor, professional practice for an RTO. For each of those levels, we will be issuing qualifications to the participants and candidates, students of RTOs. Moving on, in relation to awards of recognition within VET, there are a number of levels in which we apply those. and they are an RTO can issue a statement of attainment for a unit of competency. As I said, if a client has a staff member who only wants training in a unit of competency for a particular role or function within the workplace, we're able to train for that one single unit, and we would issue a statement of attainment. Also within the training packages, we will look at in more detail a thing called skill sets. Again, they are a group, they're an identified role or skill group within an industry, and they take a number of units of competency that represent that role and call it a skill set. Again, an RTO, registered training organisation, can issue a statement of attainment for that particular skill set for that particular industry. And finally, an RTO, registered training organisation, would issue a qualification. And again, that is the requirement is we issue a certificate for that qualification for a full set of, as I said, a qualification is a group of units of competency defining a defined role or task within a training package or industry. I want to say to you this: the word certificate and statement of attainment are protected under the legislation, and only RTOs or registered training organisations can issue those as recognition for the national training. Again, an RTO, working for a registered training organisation, there are a number of things that you will need to consider in relation to their role within the vocational education and training sector. First of all, a registered training organisation must meet the quality standards that we discussed earlier for the VET quality framework. And we're going to look at the individual organisations in a moment that set those standards up. They must meet when you initially, if you want to become an RTO, there is a registration requirements, and and you must meet those standards. They ask you to apply, and you will then be assessed on your application for you to practice as an RTO within the VET sector. And then there are the ongoing registration requirements, which are also separate standards that you will be audited against regularly. Moving on, also, you can, as an RTO, as I mentioned previously, you can issue Australian Qualification Framework qualifications and deliver accredited training and assessment. And we'll define what accredited training and assessment is, again, when we talk about training packages in more detail. Also, as an RTO, you can only deliver what they have on scope. So again, we talk about the initial registration, we talk about the ongoing registration. And at any time, once you're registered, you can apply to deliver different qualifications for different training packages for the industry groups. And again, you apply to different authorities, and we'll talk about that in a moment, to get the scope to issue a qualification to a particular student group. And finally, very importantly, you as a registered training organisation, it's very important to understand it is all about the training and assessment you deliver to your student or students within a workplace for a particular industry group. That is the single important factor in relation to you delivering national accreditation and qualifications. And those standards that I was talking about earlier are excuse me, I picked the wrong one there. Back out. And sorry, playing with my system here. Again, in relation to those quality standards that apply to registered training organisations, there are the standards for the national VET regulated RTOs. And as I said to you, there are two: the essential standards for initial registration, which is a separate document, and the essential standards for continuing registration that you would be audited against. In relation to these standards for VET regulated RTOs, that is one of the standards, and they are currently the national standards that apply for any RTO that are delivering national qualifications to all states, 1 or 2 states within Australia. That is different to the Australian Quality Training Framework, or what we talk about, the AQTF, where they have 2 standards, the essential conditions and standards for initial registration and the essential conditions and standards for continuing registrations. The Australian Quality Training Framework only currently relates to RTOs working solely within the state of Victoria or Western Australia. So if you're an RTO that you're delivering training to students within Victoria and only Victoria, you would apply to the State Training Authority based on the Australian Quality Training Framework. And same likewise with Western Australia. If you're only delivering training to a particular client group within that state, you apply to your register and ongoing registration under the Australian Quality Training Framework. They are the only 2 states that have those standards. All the other states in Australia apply to the standards for national vet regulated RTOs. Very important to understand, if we take that case scenario of delivering an RTO delivering solely within Victoria, and they choose, because one of their clients, they might have a national client that says, okay, terrific, I've been training Victoria, but we're opening an office in Queensland. And what we would like to do is you can conduct the training. If that is the case, that RTO now needs to apply for registration under the standards of national vet regulated RTOs. And they no longer become accountable to the Victorian system, which is governed by the Australian Quality Training Framework. They would then become an RTO with national jurisdiction and would have to apply for and continue to apply for registration with the standards for national vet regulated RTOs. Again, it is a national system, but at the moment there are 2 standards, one for RTOs that are delivering training and assessment nationally, and then the second standard, which is the National Qualification Training Framework, that applies to RTOs only and wanting to deliver solely within a single state of Victoria, Western Australia. Again, quite confusing. Once you get into it, it makes a bit more detail. Again, I'll remove myself to show the full slide. The important thing that you need to understand is that all training, the knowledge and skills, are documented for the industry groups in what we call training packages, and they're a set of nationally endorsed standards and qualifications used to recognise and assess the skills and knowledge people need to perform effectively in the workplace. And we're going to be doing more detail on what a training package is in a separate webinar in this introduction webinar series for you to help you with that. Moving down into the next slide. Very important for you working within the vet sector is to understand the different bodies that regulate and operate within the vet sector. I'm not going to spend too much time with this, but the first area you need to understand is DEWA, the Department of Education, Employment and Workplace Relations, and it supports the government's commitment to shaping a better future for all Australians through learning, science and innovation. They provide policy advice to the government on education, vocational education training, and also workplace relations. But principally for us, it's about they're the federal government body that support the vocational education system. Moving on, the next body we need to understand is ASQA, the Australian Skills Quality Authority, and it is the national regulator for the Australian vocational education and training sector. ASQA regulates the courses and the training providers to ensure nationally approved quality standards are met. When we were talking about those previous standards in regarding to the VET quality framework and the AQTF, it is this body, the Australian Skills Quality Authority, that approves an RTO registering at the national level for all RTOs that are delivering qualifications nationally. This is the body that accredits them and does the ongoing audit of those RTOs working within the national framework. Okay. Moving on, we then come to the AQFC, and it's the Australian Qualifications Framework Council, and is the national advisory body on policy for the regulated qualifications in the Australian education and training. What I want to highlight for you there, we talked about the AQF, the Australian Qualifications Framework, and those 10 levels. This is the body responsible for advising policy in the vocational education and training system. Moving down, I've got another definition there, which is the state training authorities. And the state training authorities is the body in Victoria and Western Australia responsible for the operation and quality control of VET within its jurisdiction. Now, we talked about previous AQTF, the Australian Quality Training Framework, and they are the standards that RTOs working within Victoria, New South Wales adhere to, and it is the STA, the State Training Authority, that is responsible for those for those particular standards. Moving on, we have further what we call ISCs, the Industry Skills Councils. Industry Skills Councils are the conduits, the vehicle, if you want to, for advice and information between the VET training sector and industry. They have the primary responsibility for the development and maintenance of the training packages. Talked about that the training packages were the nationally recognised standards and qualifications for a knowledge and skills for a particular industry. And it is the ISCs that create and maintain those training packages. And it's a very important role they have within the VET sector. As I said, the RTOs use them, and again, the ISCs maintain them. Moving down, we have the NSSC, which is the National Skills Standard Council, which provides advice on national standards for regulation of the vocational education and training. Now, again, this is an advisory body that is separate to ASQA. These set the standards, and then these are handed over to ASQA and in relation to the Australian Standards Skills Quality Authority to audit the RTOs. So there's a separation of duties. There is a responsibility for the regulator and the policy advice and who sets up the regulations to be applied. So we've got separation of duties for both those bodies. There is the training TGA. We'll be talking. There's a separate webinar totally devoted to training.gov.au or www.training.gov.au, and has been developed by the federal and state governments to guide access to current and emerging training market information in VET, and it comprises a public domain database of all things contained for VET information, including VET accredited courses, competency standards, training packages and qualifications, and RTO training providers. And we have a separate webinar dedicated to take you through and help you use that database or that website that we will access. Moving down, finally, I'd like to highlight for you, and this is the last slide in the introduction to VET, is the structure. Last thing we need to do is go into details. In relation to the acronyms, we have the federal department responsible for the VET system, the Department of Education, of Employment, Education and Workplace Relations. There are 3 bodies that directly administer the VET system. We have within the national framework, we have ASQA, and the framework, as you can see, it's the policy document, is the VET Quality Framework. And for those RTOs working solely within Victoria and Western Australia, their responsible authority is the State Training Authority. And again, the policy document that applies or standards are the Australian Quality Training Framework. The second body or statutory body that applies within the VET sector is the Australian the Australian Qualifications Framework Council. And again, their principal policy document is the Australian Qualifications Framework. And they're the 10 levels that we discussed earlier. And finally, we have the National Skills Standard Council that is responsible for putting together the regulations for the VET sector, as well as the developing the training package development handbook, which is the guidelines for which the Industry Skills Council create the training packages. A role of the National Skills Standards Council is also to approve any changes, any new and changes to the existing training packages. Once they have done that, they pass that information up to the training.gov.au public domain website and database that you can access to find that information. As you can see here, there's a direct relationship between ASQA and the STA with